Hi, I'm Mirren, and this is not just about a lobster. You see, during our family cruise, while everyone laughed and raised glasses over golden lobster tails, my plate was something else, something plain, quiet, like me. But it wasn't just dinner, it was the photos I was cropped out of, the heirloom from my mother, gifted to someone else, the will where my name disappeared. They smiled at me while writing me out of everything, so I started taking notes. Then I started recording. And what I found, it wasn't just omission, it was strategy. Now tell me, how many times can you be erased by your I stood next to Ellis at the port in Seattle, shielding my eyes from the late afternoon glare bouncing off the ship's chrome details? It was one of those picture-perfect moments, if you ignored the undercurrent humming in my chest. The ship loomed tall, pristine, and staged, like a set piece for someone else's version of my life. Around us, Celine was orchestrating introductions like a pageant host. "Oh, make sure to capture that angle, sweetheart," she told the photographer, gesturing toward Callista's family. Her hand grazed my shoulder, but didn't rest there. It was a gesture for the camera, not for me. She called out to everyone by name, hugs, kisses, little inside jokes for each one. To me, just a faint nod. We boarded in clusters. Ellis handed over our tickets and murmured, "Try not to take it personally. She's just formal." Formal. That's what we were still calling it. Inside the ship, it smelled like polished wood and chilled wine. My heels clicked along the corridor as we followed the signs toward our cabins. As we passed each door, I noticed gold-embossed nameplates for the other family members. Callista Max, Tom Heather plus kids, ours read, Ellis plus guest. That was my first real gulp of salt. Dinner came not long after. The formal dining room was dressed in silver linens, soft lighting, and ambient jazz. Celine had reserved a private room just for our family, a move she claimed was to make it extra special, though it felt more like a stage. We filed in, and I watched Celine adjust seating like a wedding planner. She positioned herself at the center of the long table, flanked by Ellis on one side, Callista on the other. I was directed toward the end. When I hesitated, she gave me that tight-lipped smile, the one I knew so well by now. "You prefer the quiet end, right? Gives you space to think." I sat without a word. Dinner began with champagne. To my left, the waiter poured generously. To my right, more laughter, more glasses. Mine? A glass of lemon water. Then came the entrees. Polished platters arrived one by one, lobster tails gleaming under warm butter, plated like a painting. Each cousin marveled, dabbing napkins and lifting their forks in perfect rhythm. Then, to me, a simple grilled chicken breast over steamed broccoli. The waiter set it down with a cautious smile. Celine piped up, "We kept it light for you. Not everyone enjoys indulgence." I looked down at my plate. The chicken looked dry, the broccoli was limp. I nodded and muttered thanks while everyone avoided my gaze. Ellis leaned in and whispered, "I'm sure it's just a mix-up." A mix-up. That phrase had become a recurring guest in my marriage, like the holiday gift mix-up that meant I received a keychain while Callista got a sapphire bracelet, or the anniversary dinner miscommunication that ended with Ellis alone at Celine's country club. I took a bite of broccoli and chewed slowly, quietly. Later, as dessert arrived, raspberry tarts, crème brûlée, I noticed Callista's youngest whispering in her ear and pointing at me. Callista gave a soft chuckle and nodded. I didn't hear what she said, but I didn't need to. I excused myself early. Back in our room, the air felt different. Thicker, maybe. The cabin was small but well-appointed. A queen bed, fresh linens, 2 robes. On the bed was a welcome packet. Itinerary, cruise highlights, activity sign-up sheets. Ellis's name was on the folder. Mine wasn't. I flipped through it anyway. Day 2, family brunch. Day 3, island excursion. Day 4, gala night. No mention of me. I called the front desk. "Yes, ma'am, I see the reservation for Mr. Ellis. It looks like there's no companion activity registration associated. Could be a clerical oversight." Another one. When I mentioned it to Celine later that evening in passing, she laughed lightly. "Oh well, maybe a little rest will do you good. Some quiet time, away from the chaos. She said it like she was offering me a gift. That night, I stood alone on the upper deck as the ship pulled away from the port. Seattle's lights dimmed behind us. Around me, other guests were laughing, sipping cocktails, snapping photos. The ocean was a blanket of black glass. I held onto the railing and stared into the nothingness. Ellis had fallen asleep already. "You're overthinking again," he had said, brushing his hand over mine before turning away. I'd heard that phrase too many times. In my pocket was a small notebook I carried everywhere. I opened to a blank page and wrote 2 lines. Chapter Chicken Broccoli, everyone else, Lobster, welcome folder, no name, 2 bullet points, that's all. I closed the notebook, but the line stayed open in my chest. This wasn't the first time I'd felt invisible, but it might be the last time I let it go unnoticed. I wasn't angry, not yet, but I was awake. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Ellis was still asleep, his arms sprawled across the other side of the bed, like a man who hadn't noticed the chill that had moved in overnight. I slipped out from under the covers without waking him and dressed quickly, tugging on a soft cardigan and flats, skipping makeup. No one was looking at me anyway. The breakfast buffet had already started when I arrived at the dining lounge. The room buzzed with conversation, laughter echoing off the glass walls, kids squealing about pancakes shaped like dolphins. I scanned the tables and spotted our family's section, long and dressed in white linens, complete with name cards and tiny flower arrangements. I spotted Callista's place immediately. Her name was embossed in gold script beside a vase of pale pink tulips. Tom's seat was 2 down, then Heather, then Celine near the head. Mine was nowhere. As I stood there, one of Celine's friends, a woman with pearls so large they looked like Christmas ornaments, smiled politely and gestured to the side table. "Celine said you prefer the quiet corner," she chirped. "More peaceful over here." I turned and saw a small round table set for one near the windows, slightly away from the family's stretch. A single chair, 1 set of silverware, and a plate already set with fruit. No name card. I walked toward it, sat down, ate in silence. No one came over. Ellis arrived midway through the meal, scanned the table, then locked eyes with me. He gave a hesitant smile and started to head my way, but Celine called out, loud enough to halt him mid-step. "Darling, sit by me. I need your opinion on the cabin assignments for Whitaker's graduation trip." He obeyed. I picked at my melon slices and tuned into the conversations flowing around me. Everyone was busy comparing excursion plans, spa packages, gift shop finds. I wasn't asked a single question, not even a "how did you sleep?" After breakfast, the group slowly filtered toward the central promenade where Celine had arranged a surprise, a family legacy moments photo wall curated by the cruise's photographer. I followed at a distance, hands shoved deep in my pockets. The first photo was from boarding day. Celine, arms open, greeting her grandchildren. The next showed Ellis and Callista clinking glasses at dinner. Another showed the cousins playing cards on the deck. I stopped in front of one image in particular, a wide shot of last night's dinner. I remembered it. I remembered the flash, the awkward angle, the way the waiter had hesitated before snapping the picture. But in this print, I wasn't there. The space where I'd been sitting, right beside the fireplace, was now just an empty stretch of tablecloth. Callista sidled up beside me. "You must have stepped out. Maybe the lighting was bad," she said with a sugary grin. "I was sitting right there," I said evenly, not moving my eyes from the photo. "Well, angles can be unkind." She gave a light chuckle and moved on. I took out my phone and pulled up my own shot from the same dinner. There I was, unmistakably in frame, seated, present, smiling even. I zoomed in on the fireplace for confirmation. Then I tucked the phone away and walked slowly back to my cabin. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I didn't sign up for any of the group excursions. I stayed on the deck, watching the coastline shrink and widen again, depending on which island we passed. Around 4, I returned to change for the evening event, the family legacy toast. It sounded like something you'd hear at a political fundraiser or a class reunion. But Celine had made it clear, this was the night to honor the pillars of our family. The lounge was arranged like a wedding reception, gold-rimmed glassware, a microphone at the front, staff with trays of champagne circulating like sharks. I stayed near the back as guests trickled in. Ellis found me and whispered, "Don't be mad. She just wants this night to go smoothly." "I'm not mad," I replied. "I'm observing." He furrowed his brow but said nothing. When Celine stepped up to the mic, she looked like a woman in complete control. Navy silk dress, diamonds at her ears, that soft smile she'd mastered for decades. "Tonight," she began, "is about honoring the legacy we've built together. Each of you brings something unique, something worthy of recognition." One by one, she called out names. To Tom and Heather, for always keeping our traditions alive with the kids' scavenger hunts. Applause. To Callista, for organizing the welcome baskets. Such a thoughtful touch. Louder applause. To Ellis, for managing all the technical logistics and giving us a flawless experience. Whistles and clapping. She moved on to more extended family, cousins, in-laws, even the cruise staff who went above and beyond. She never said my name. She didn't even glance in my direction. I felt Ellis stiffen beside me, like he knew, but wasn't going to say anything. Not here, not now. When the toast ended, people stood, clinking glasses, hugging. I remained seated, hands folded on my lap. Someone brushed past me and muttered, "Was she even invited to this?" Later that night, back in my cabin, I dug through the pockets of my cruise jacket and pulled out the photo from dinner, the one on my phone now printed. I laid it beside the official print I'd requested earlier from the photographer. Mine showed me in full light, a guest among the rest. The cruise print had me erased. I stared at the two images side by side. This wasn't just about dinner. It wasn't about a missing name card or a cold entree. It was about being written out of the story. I opened my journal and titled a new page. Phase 1. Visual erasure, deliberate. Patterns, confirmable. Reclaim voice, publicly, not passively. Then I closed the book, paused, then opened it again. One more line. Next step. Observe their moves. Document everything. That night, I barely slept. The steady hum of the ship's engine, the soft creaks in the ceiling panels above our cabin, even Ellis's rhythmic breathing beside me, it all grated on my nerves like sandpaper across glass. I had closed my notebook with the intention of finding peace, of sleeping on clarity. Instead, my mind raced through memories, picking apart moments that once felt benign, but now pulsed with new meanings. By late afternoon the next day, after dodging yet another family gathering around the pool deck, I returned to our cabin to find a small paper bag resting just outside the door. No card, no note, just neatly folded tissue paper peeking out of the top. I stepped inside, closed the door behind me, and unwrapped it carefully. Inside was an old-fashioned kitchen tool, an egg slicer, of all things, tarnished with faded plastic handles and barely sharp wires. At first I stared at it, confused, then I saw the note tucked beneath it. Something to keep your hands busy. S. I let out a short breath through my nose, not a laugh, not anger yet, just breath. Ellis walked out of the bathroom just then, towel around his neck. He glanced at the slicer in my hand and raised his eyebrows. "She's being thoughtful," he said, then chuckled lightly. "You always said you liked vintage stuff, right?" I looked at him. Really looked. "You think she found this in a vintage shop?" I asked. "I think she's trying," he replied, drying his hands. I didn't argue. What was the point? I walked over to the small drawer under the desk and tucked the slicer inside. I took out a label from the stationery kit I brought and wrote, "Passive-aggressive tokens." It joined the envelope from the welcome basket that had Ellis plus guest printed on the outside, and the note from the dinner menu with light options scrawled in the corner. Later, around 5, I needed air. I told Ellis I was heading to the observation deck for a walk. He nodded, half distracted by the sports channel playing muted highlights from last season's football playoffs. The hallway leading toward the deck was quiet. Dimmed lighting, the scent of polished wood and sea salt hanging in the air. As I neared the corner by Celine's suite, I slowed down. Her door was cracked open. Just enough. I wasn't trying to snoop, but I heard my name. "After this trip, I want things sorted," Celine said. Her voice had that edge I knew too well, low, clipped, transactional. That Seattle house, it should revert to Ellis alone. Myron's too, unsteady to manage anything meaningful. My body went rigid. I held my breath. She doesn't even know half of what's happening, Callista added. Her voice was casual, like she was discussing dinner reservations. She probably thinks Ellis still handles the taxes. Ellis didn't respond. Not a single sound, not even a breath. So they're not just ignoring me, I whispered to myself. They're planning around me. I pressed my back against the wall, just out of view, my heart pounding so loudly I was afraid they might hear it echo through the paneling. Their voices faded into lower hums, indecipherable, but I didn't need to hear the rest. I turned and walked quietly away, forcing my feet not to stomp. Back in the cabin, I sat at the edge of the bed and stared at the closet for what felt like hours, but couldn't have been more than 10 minutes. A tight ball of nausea settled in my gut. The wedding bouquet that got misplaced, the property paperwork that had my name left off. A clerical error, the lawyer had said, though Ellis never looked too surprised. The book club I started 3 years ago, now renamed Callista's Circle on Facebook with my name nowhere on the admin list. They weren't coincidences. They were patterns. I pulled out my journal again. They don't see me as part of this family, I wrote. They want my silence to become disappearance. I turned to a fresh page and titled it in bold letters, The Legacy File. I jotted down every incident I could remember that pointed to erasure, deliberate or disguised. I drew arrows, made bullet points, labeled connections between people and moments and paper trails. I wasn't crying. I wasn't even angry in the loud sense of the word. I was just done pretending. After an hour, I grabbed my laptop. The Wi-Fi was spotty, but the cruise tech lounge had offline tools. I started scanning documents, birth certificates, the original joint mortgage statements, old texts from Celine that I had screenshotted and stored in a folder I once called funny quotes. They didn't feel funny anymore. I backed everything up to an encrypted drive, uploaded another copy to a cloud folder linked to my private email, and named the folder Mere Fam Evidence. Then I opened the cruise staff directory, scrolled to the tech concierge section, and ordered a pocket-sized voice recorder and lapel mic. Discreet, portable, easy to use. The order confirmation pinged in my inbox within minutes. I closed the laptop slowly, slid the journal back into the drawer, and placed the egg slicer next to it. As I stood, I caught my reflection in the narrow mirror near the door. For a moment, I barely recognized myself, not because of age or fatigue, but because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't wearing the face of someone trying to keep peace. I was wearing the face of someone keeping receipts. After renaming my folder to the archive, I closed the laptop and sat in the stillness for a moment, hands resting on the smooth surface of the desk. There was something disturbingly satisfying about labeling a digital box for everything they tried to hide. It was like naming my ghosts and putting them into files I controlled. I heard laughter echoing down the hallway a few minutes later, so I stood, adjusted the throw on the edge of the bed, and opened the cabin door to peek out. A cluster of family members passed by, dressed casually, heading toward the lower lounge. I noticed Ellis among them, walking just behind Celine, his head tilted slightly as if listening but not fully present. I stayed behind. I needed to get ready. The next day was the Family Colors Day, something Celine had invented 3 years ago after a trip to Carmel, where she declared that matching outfits made memories photogenic. The official itinerary had listed cream and gold as the dress code. Subtle, understated. Regal, she had said. But late the night before, I'd received a message on the cruise app from Callista. It was brief. Celine thought you'd look amazing in red. Wear that, it'll pop. Just that. No emojis, no warm sign-off. Part of me knew better. The part of me that had already documented a folder labeled symbolic exclusion. But I'd been trained too long to doubt my instincts. Maybe this time it really was a compliment. Maybe they were finally seeing me for something more than a placeholder. So I ironed the red dress I had packed for gala night, deep crimson silk, modest neckline, long sleeves, one of the few things I bought without second-guessing. That morning, I arrived at the upper lounge right on time. The sunlight filtered through the glass ceiling, casting golden lines on the floor like God himself had curated the lighting. Everyone was already seated or milling about in their matching hues: cream blazers, gold accessories, beige dresses, and soft tan shoes. And then there was me. I walked in, and the entire palette shifted. Heads turned. Laughter thinned. Conversations paused. "Didn't she get the memo?" someone murmured. Sounded like Heather's tone, though I couldn't be sure. Celine's gaze landed on me, her lips curled upward, tight and poised. "Well," she said, lifting a champagne glass, "someone's ready to be the center of attention." It wasn't what she said. It was the way she said it, as though I had interrupted a funeral with a marching band. Her smile never touched her eyes. I nodded politely, not giving her the satisfaction of a reaction. Then I made my way to the end of the row, where one open seat waited, slightly distanced from the rest. Photographers from the ship's media team began setting up for the group photo. Celine directed them like a producer on set. "Callista, next to Ellis. Children up front, grandparents in the center. Let's keep it tight." I stood off to the side, waiting for instruction. Celine glanced at me, then turned back to the photographer. "You can tuck her in by the window. That red will balance the shadows." Tuck her in, as if I were throw pillow. The camera clicked, flashes went off. Smiles were held, teeth exposed, arms gently draped over one another. I held my breath through all of it, smiling because I refused to give them a shot they could use against me. After the session ended, everyone drifted into smaller groups: coffee, conversation, staged candids. I slipped out toward the back deck, where Ronan sat cross-legged with a coloring book and a pack of markers. He looked up and smiled. "Hi, Aunt Mirren." I crouched down beside him. "What you working on?" "Drawing our family picture, the one from earlier." He turned the sketch pad so I could see a row of stick figures labeled Grandma, Grandpa, Dad, Mom, him, his sister. There was an empty spot at the edge. He picked up a red marker. "Can I be this one?" I asked. He looked up at me with serious eyes. "Are you really not part of the family?" The air left my lungs without warning. "Because you're never in the pictures, and Grandma said you were visiting, so I didn't know if I should draw you." He meant it innocently. There was no malice in his voice, just honesty. Brutal, clean honesty. I blinked once, twice. "You can draw me," I said softly. "Put me right there. That spot's perfect." He nodded and began coloring in the dress. "Okay, I'll give you a gold heart too." I sat there another minute, pretending to admire the waves while my chest tightened like it hadn't in years. Then I stood, told him I'd see him at lunch, and walked briskly back to the cabin. Once inside, I locked the door behind me, unzipped the red dress, and folded it with more precision than necessary. I slipped it into a clear plastic bag I kept for damp swimsuits and labeled it with a black marker. Evidence, symbolic erasure. Then I opened my journal and wrote down Ronan's words. "Even the innocent see it. That means it's real." I stared at that line for a long time, pen tapping the edge of the page. Enough observing, enough wondering if I was imagining it. I picked up my phone and opened an email draft to Asa, my brother in Boston. Subject: "You were right." Message: "I need your help. I need to record this properly." I hit send. Not 10 minutes later, I received a reply with a tracking link and a note. "It'll meet you at the next port. Don't wait. You've got this." That evening, as the sun dipped into the horizon, I changed into a sweater and jeans, opened my laptop, and renamed the folder. No more Phase 1. No more polite notes and inner debates. Now it was simply the archive. I would document every slight, every omission, every time someone looked through me as if I didn't exist. If they wanted to write me out of this family, they were going to have to fight the footnotes I planned to leave behind. The napkin had been folded neatly, almost reverently, and left just outside my cabin door. The handwriting was unmistakable. Celine's precise cursive, the same one she used on Christmas tags and condolence notes. "You've made your point, but don't forget who holds the pen." I held it between two fingers like it might smudge something more permanent if I touched it too long. Then I folded it in half again and placed it in the drawer next to the tarnished egg slicer still labeled passive-aggressive tokens. The drawer was getting full. It was just past 7 a.m. The hallway was still quiet, save for a staff member rolling a breakfast cart down toward the other end. I locked the door and turned back to the desk. The day ahead needed more than documentation. It needed confrontation, not the kind with shouting or slammed doors. That had never worked with Celine. She didn't yell. She withdrew. She made people question themselves, doubt their memories, reinterpret events until her version became the only version left standing. I wasn't going to play that game. Instead, I laid out my notes, my printed screenshots, the 3 photos side by side, one of the family moment photo from the hallway with me cropped out, the one I had taken that night showing myself seated clearly, and a third from the brunch, the group in coordinated cream and gold, and me in red, stuck at the edge like an unwanted highlight. I chose my words carefully. The letter wasn't a rant. It wasn't even angry. It was methodical. I knew I couldn't make them feel what I felt, but I could make them see what they'd done. I wrote 11 copies, each one sealed in its own envelope. No handwritten names. Just simple typed labels. Please read. In the center of the letter, bolded, underlined, these are not accusations, these are patterns. Then bullet points, like any corporate memo, inconsistent inclusion in family communications and plans, misattributed contributions or exclusion from public acknowledgments, emotional distancing masked as tradition, humor, or convenience. I included small images, side-by-sides that showed what was real versus what was presented. No captions, just juxtaposition. By 11 a.m., I slipped each envelope under the door of every family cabin. Last was my own. I slid it halfway beneath, paused, then pulled a red pen from my bag and scribbled across the front. So you don't forget me this time. At lunch, no one said anything. Not a word. People made eye contact, but just barely. Celine didn't look at me at all. Callista walked in late, wearing sunglasses indoors. She murmured something about a headache and sat 2 seats away from me, even though her usual spot was directly beside me. A child asked for butter and knocked over a glass. The clatter was the loudest sound at the table. Ellis leaned toward me at one point. "You really sent them?" I didn't turn to look at him. "I'm not invisible anymore," I said, picking up my glass. He didn't respond. After the meal, I walked the long path toward the spa lounge. It wasn't where I wanted to go, but it was where Celine went every day around 3 p.m., right after tea, before her 4 o'clock nap. I had left the small audio recorder there earlier, wedged just behind a planter near the doorway. The angle wasn't ideal, but the microphone had range. Back in my room, I uploaded the file to my laptop and clicked play. It was clearer than I expected. Celine's voice floated out like silk-draped poison. "She married into us, but she'll never be one of us," she said, followed by a soft laugh. "Honestly, we're being kind even letting her tag along." The woman she spoke to chuckled and replied, "Oh, bless her heart." Celine continued, "Some people just don't fit. And when they try too hard, it's uncomfortable, isn't it?" I stopped the recording there. I sat back and stared at the ceiling, letting the words settle over me. It wasn't new. It wasn't surprising. But it was final. The mask was off, even if only in private. I clicked Save and titled the file, Confirmed Social Erasure. Timestamp 3:24 p.m. I emailed it to myself, backed it up to a flash drive, then made a secure upload to the archive folder on my private cloud. Subject line, "If ever questioned, this is why." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even feel the urge. The pain had dulled into something sharper, like a blade that no longer burns but slices clean. That night, I skipped dinner. I ordered room service, soup and a small salad, and sat on the balcony wrapped in a fleece blanket, watching the lights on the horizon blink against the sea. The waves were gentle. For once, my stomach wasn't twisted in knots. When I returned to the bedroom, I saw something on the floor just inside the door. At first, I thought it was a napkin from lunch, dropped by housekeeping, but it was folded neatly, on top, in the same sharp handwriting. "You've made your point, but don't forget who holds the pen." I picked it up, smoothed it flat. This was no invitation for resolution. This was a warning, and it was written in the same ink she used to sign birthday cards and legal documents. I placed it under my laptop and turned off the lights. Whatever came next, I wasn't going to whisper. The sun hadn't fully risen when I opened my cabin door and found the note waiting. A staff member must have delivered it while the hallway was still hushed, during the in-between time when breakfast trays clink faintly and the ship rocks soft as breath. I read it twice before walking back inside. Tomorrow's gala menu has been finalized. Lobster, of course. A special plate awaits. No signature, of course. But it didn't need one. I folded the note and placed it next to my laptop, right beside the thumb drive labeled Audio Logs. Then I closed the folder I'd reviewed the night before. Legal precedent, coercion, dehumanization, intimidation. It was ready, all of it. By the time I dressed and made my way toward the upper lounge for the morning's legacy presentation, the air on the ship had changed. Conversations were tighter. Laughter had a brittle edge to it. Maybe that was me. Maybe that was them. The lounge looked like it had been dressed for a small wedding. White linen tablecloths, soft gold ribbons tied to the back of every chair, and framed portraits of past generations perched on easels near the buffet. Celine stood at the center, surrounded by a small circle of friends, her voice warm, but just controlled enough to feel scripted. I took a seat toward the back. No one said anything when I entered. No one motioned for me to sit closer. That had become the norm. Celine eventually took the microphone with a poise that made her seem born with it. "This morning," she said, "we're celebrating the items that remind us who we are, what we come from, and who we entrust that legacy to." She gestured toward a velvet-lined case that an attendant brought forward and placed on a pedestal. "This piece," she continued, "was once worn by my beloved daughter-in-law's mother. It's delicate, historic, and full of heart. And today, I believe Callista represents the grace and strength this piece deserves." The room held its collective breath. She opened the case and revealed a locket, oval, gold, slightly worn at the edges. I stopped breathing for a second. It was my mother's. I stood without thinking. "That locket," I said, my voice clear, unwavering, "was in my jewelry pouch 2 days ago." Heads turned. Celine turned too, her expression crafted into subtle shock. "It was found in the shared safe." There was no name on the pouch. "There was," I replied. "My initials, M.W., engraved inside the clasp." Celine's gaze didn't flicker. "The staff said it was unclaimed." "I logged it at check-in. Signed a form." I turned toward the cruise manager near the buffet. "There's a copy." He shifted uncomfortably. Callista placed a hand delicately over the locket, then withdrew it slowly as if it had become radioactive. Ellis remained seated, staring at the glass in front of him like it held a message he couldn't read. I didn't say another word. I didn't need to. The silence that followed was enough to raise the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. I turned, walked out slowly, and didn't look back. As I made my way back toward my cabin, I noticed something odd at the end of the hallway. Each door bore a placard with the names of its occupants. Thompson family, Callista Ellis, Heather plus kids, all in uniform script, except mine. Mine read, "Guest, row 6, please check ID before entry." I stopped, looked at it, read it again. It wasn't even handwritten. It had been printed, laminated, and mounted on a plastic frame. I reached up, pulled it off, and stood holding it like a piece of rotting fruit. I opened my door, walked straight to the desk, opened the drawer labeled passive-aggressive tokens, and placed it on top. I scribbled a new sticky note. Dehumanization, Exhibit C. That evening, just after sundown, I took the long route to the lower deck. Celine liked to be alone out there. It was where she unwound, according to Callista, with her glass of Pinot and her hair pinned just so. She didn't turn when I stepped beside her, but she knew I was there. "You've crossed from cruelty into theft," I said quietly. She didn't flinch. "And now?" she replied, still facing the horizon. "You're giving speeches?" I ignored the jab. "You didn't have to go this far." "I haven't gone anywhere," she said flatly. "Oh, you just don't understand what it means to belong. You were married in, not born in. That makes a difference. whether you want to admit it or not. So stealing from me makes it right? She turned to face me then, the corner of her mouth tugging upward. You've always been too sensitive. That's your word for it, I said. Mine is observant. She didn't answer. I didn't expect her to. I returned to the cabin and sat down at the desk for the last time before tomorrow's gala. I wrote a single line to Asa and attached the latest files. Subject: Final prep. Message: Install sequence complete. Tomorrow I flipped the switch. I double-checked everything. Visual evidence folder. Complete. Audio logs. Edited. Dated. Legal precedent. Ready for reference. Backup drive. Encrypted. USB presentation. Loaded and waiting. I wasn't preparing for revenge. I was preparing for the record. At 9:42 p.m., there was a gentle knock at the door. When I opened it, a crew member handed me a silver envelope. Inside, the official printed menu for tomorrow night's gala. Main course: lobster tail with saffron butter. Vegetarian option available upon request. Myron Winters. Custom plate. Chef's discretion. No explanation. Just a whisper dressed as hospitality. I held the paper for a moment, then folded it twice and tucked it into the lining of my black dress for tomorrow. Let them bring their lobster. Let them bring their cameras. I'd bring my receipts. I spent the morning walking the perimeter of the deck, my arms folded, the air cool against my bare skin. The staff had started setting up early, stringing soft lights along the railings and arranging gold-accented linens across the banquet tables inside the grand ballroom. Tonight was the gala, Celine's centerpiece event, her finale. It was also the night she'd planned to honor the future of the family, which meant, as it always did, erasing the part of it that didn't fit her narrative. That part was me. I didn't eat lunch. I didn't speak to Ellis, though we passed each other briefly near the elevators. He looked at me like he wanted to say something, then didn't. That, too, had become familiar. By early evening, I had everything packed: USB drive, backup files, folder with screenshots, timelines, signed witness statements from the cruise staff I'd discreetly spoken to over the past day and a half. I even included a copy of the original will my mother had kept in a locked box, and the modified version that had conveniently left me out. The one I found on Ellis's laptop when he left it open by mistake. He hadn't even tried to hide it. I got dressed with intention. No jewelry, no statement pieces, just a simple black dress, unfitted, floor-length, long sleeves, no contour, no color. I didn't need decoration. I wanted to look like a witness, or a mirror. The ballroom was already humming when I arrived. Waiters circled with glasses of champagne. Celine stood near the head of the room, greeting guests with that flawless glide of hers, gloved in manners and false warmth. She kissed cheeks, laughed on cue, rested her hands lightly on the shoulders of people she needed to impress. She didn't look at me. I found my seat near the end of the family table. A small white card with silver print awaited me. It read, Mirren, special dietary plate. Subtle. Precise. Just enough to label me as different without drawing comment. The kind of insult that came dressed as concern. The rest of the table received lobster tails arranged like sculptures, golden brown, seared edges dotted with chives and saffron butter. My plate arrived last: steamed rice, a few slices of cucumber, and a poached pear. No seasoning, no dressing, no explanation. Celine stood. To honoring each person's uniqueness, she said, lifting her glass. Callista laughed softly, the corners of her mouth twitching like she'd rehearsed the reaction. The room applauded politely. I stood too. I'd like to offer a toast as well, I said. A few heads turned. Some blinked. Ellis straightened slightly in his seat. I pulled the tablet from my purse and walked to the center of the room. No podium, no mic. I didn't need one. I tapped the screen. The large display behind the buffet table flickered. One of Celine's curated slideshows had been paused there. Photos of the family over the years, edited for perfection. Then the screen went black, and a new video began. The room fell silent. The footage was grainy but unmistakable. Callista entering my cabin while I was on the upper deck, rifling through my drawer, pulling out a folder. She slipped it into her bag and left, glancing down the hall to make sure no one saw. Murmurs began. The video faded and another clip began. Celine's voice, caught on audio in the spa corridor. She married into us, but she'll never be one of us. Honestly, we're being kind, even letting her tag along. More whispers. A hand covered a mouth. Someone's wine glass clinked too loudly on the table. Callista stood up halfway. This is taken out of context. No, I interrupted. This is the context. You've just been allowed to perform a different version of it. I turned to face the guests. My voice didn't shake. For years, I've been edited out of photos, omitted from documents, excluded from moments, deliberately. Tonight, I'm showing my version. My record. I held up a folder. This includes logs, documents, backups of legal filings, original estate plans, and unedited communications. I've saved everything. And tonight, I made sure it's backed up to 3 locations, one in this room, one in my lawyer's inbox, and one with a local news contact, in case anyone is tempted to reorganize it. Celine hadn't moved. She didn't interrupt. She didn't blink. I looked directly at her. If my name can be erased from family records, photos, invitations, menus, then it's only fair it appears somewhere else. I turned back to the table. In truth, on record, and starting tonight, in memory. I placed the tablet on the table and sat down. I didn't touch the food. I didn't take another sip of water. The room remained still for a moment longer. Then the tension broke in soft waves. Forks resumed clinking. Quiet chatter resumed, but it all felt muted, smaller, almost embarrassed. Ellis leaned toward me, but said nothing. Then, finally, Celine picked up her fork, cut into her lobster, and chewed. Without looking at me, she said coldly, "That was a performance, but let's see how you handle Act 2. There was a breeze that night, barely a whisper of wind gliding across the deck, but it was enough to carry Ellis's words straight through me. "I think it's time we talk about the will again," he said, his voice cautious, like he was testing the temperature before stepping in. I didn't respond right away. My eyes stayed on the horizon, where the last of the daylight was melting into the water. The lights of the ballroom behind us still flickered, muted now after the abrupt end of Celine's carefully choreographed event. I waited a beat, maybe 2, before turning to him. "You knew," I said, not accusingly. Just a fact that had been left unsaid too long. He shifted, eyes scanning the deck railings. "I didn't think it would come to this." "Not like this." "What did you think it would come to?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Finally, he exhaled. "I thought she'd tire out. Let it go. That she was stuck in the past, clinging to control." "No," I said, steady. "She was rewriting the past, rewriting me." We stood in silence, long enough to feel the weight of everything unsaid. Then I walked past him, back toward my cabin, where the final chapter of Celine's script had just been torn from her hands. The room was exactly as I left it, tidy, centered. The black dress I had worn still hung over the back of the chair. On the table sat the tablet, now turned off, the USB drive beside it like a dagger sheathed after use. Just an hour earlier, that ballroom had belonged to her. She'd stood beneath those lights, voice wrapped in silk, ushering in her version of family history. But her legacy video had taken a turn she hadn't scripted. After the last image of Ellis and Callista faded, I had paused. Let them soak in the silence before the truth surfaced. Then, as planned, the screen darkened and reawakened. The video I had prepared played without apology. First, footage of Callista stepping into my cabin while I was out on the upper deck, pulling open my drawer, slipping a folder into her tote bag. Then, Celine's voice, unmistakable, recorded from the spa corridor. Her laugh, dry and superior. "She married into us, but she'll never be one of us." It continued, my name absent from family records, manipulated documents, estate plans forged without my signature. It played like a court case closing argument. I didn't speak until it was over. And when I did, I said only, "This is what omission looks like. On paper, on camera, in voice." I hadn't looked at Celine during it. Not until she stood, face blank, and hissed through clenched teeth. "You've embarrassed this family." "No," I told her. "You did. I just pressed play." The room froze. And then, slowly, fractured. Conversations buzzed like broken speakers. A guest stood and left. The cruise director moved toward the podium, awkwardly, and cleared his throat to end the evening, a bit earlier than expected. Some hugged me. Some couldn't meet my eye. And Ellis. He walked across the ballroom and sat beside me. He placed his hand gently over mine and didn't say a word. Now, alone in my cabin, I could still feel that moment pressed into my skin like a sunburn. Not painful, but sensitive, real. I changed out of the dress, washed my face, tied my hair back. Then I sat at the small writing desk and opened a new page in my journal. No titles this time, just words. Power unspoken is still power, but power unrecorded disappears. I drew a line beneath it, then another. There was a soft knock at the door. This time, it wasn't a note. The cruise director stood there, looking sheepish. "Ms. Winters, may I?" I stepped aside. He handed me an envelope. "I thought you should know." Some of the guests filed complaints about what happened tonight, but they weren't against you. "Complaints?" I asked. He nodded. "Multiple passengers said they were misled by the program's intentions. One woman said she felt complicit after what she saw." I stared at him. "Thank you for letting me know." He paused. "For what it's worth. You were right to show it." Then he turned and left. I held the envelope in my hand a moment before placing it on top of the folded dress. My name had been missing for years, from photos, from credits, from lists of thank yous. Tonight, it had landed in their memory, whether they wanted it or not. A few minutes later, as the ship coasted quietly toward port, I returned to the upper deck. The stars had pushed through the clouds now, glittering soft and low. I stood alone at the railing until I heard footsteps behind me. "I was going to come find you," Ellis said. I didn't turn. "You said something earlier, about rewriting." I waited. He stepped beside me, silent for a long moment. Then, "You were in the original will. The first one. The one Mom said she lost." My throat tightened, but I kept still. "I found a copy," he continued, "in her files, buried under obsolete drafts." I let the words settle between us. "So what now?" I asked. He rubbed the back of his neck. "I want to fix it. I mean legally, and I want to talk to Dad's old attorney. Start over, correct it, with your name right where it should have been." I turned to him, finally. "I'm not asking to be added back in. I'm asking not to be removed in the first place." "I know," he said quietly. And that was it. Not closure, but an opening. Later that night, I sat in my room, Ronan's drawing on the table beside me, a family sketch from earlier in the trip. His tiny hands had drawn me in, this time right in the center, with a golden heart on my dress. I slipped it into my suitcase. For once, I didn't need a seat at their table. I had built my own. Ellis's voice had barely faded when I turned back toward the railing. I didn't answer. Not because I was angry, or even surprised, just done trying to extract meaning from people who only spoke clearly when they needed to rewrite something. The wind had calmed, the ocean too. It was the last night on the ship, and everything felt eerily still, like we were all waiting for the page to turn, but no one wanted to be the one to move it. That morning, before the sun had fully cracked open the sky, I woke with the oddest sensation, like I'd grown taller overnight. Not physically, of course, but I stood straighter. I took up space in the cabin in a way I hadn't before. The hallway outside had the stale hush of farewell day. Luggage lined the walls. Doors creaked open and closed as families checked for passports, zipped up tote bags, counted heads. I stepped out of my room and saw, for the first time since boarding, my name on the door. Mirren Winters. Not guest 06. Not Ellis +1. I paused, then reached up, removed the placard, folded it neatly, and slid it into the inner pocket of my coat. Not out of sentimentality, but for the record, the final one. Down the hall, Celine's door remained closed. No staff going in or out, no chatter from inside. Rumor had it she'd skipped breakfast and requested private disembarkation. Ellis found me near the back deck. He stood quietly beside me for a while before speaking. I should have seen it sooner. I didn't look at him, but I nodded once. You weren't meant to, I said. She trained you not to. He nodded slowly. No defense. No excuse. That was new. We rode the ferry back to Seattle in silence. The sun rose higher, glinting off the water, casting golden light on everything, regardless of what it had done the night before. A week later, I received an email from Ellis with the subject line, Next Steps. It contained a scanned PDF of the original will. My name was there, in black and white, underlined in my father-in-law's blocky handwriting. The one Celine claimed had been a working draft. I've already spoken with an attorney, Ellis wrote. We'll fix it, properly this time, in writing. I didn't reply right away, not because I didn't appreciate it, but because I was learning not to rush toward repair before making space for what had been broken. Back home, the public reaction came in waves. The cruise staff filed a formal report regarding guest misconduct. A local blogger who covered high-profile family scandals picked up a tip from someone on the ship and published a short piece titled Lobster, Legacy, and the Cost of Silence. No names were mentioned, but anyone who knew us could read between the lines. Celine's calendar, once packed with charity luncheons, gallery openings, and bridge games, began to look suspiciously empty. The phone rang less. Messages went unanswered. Holiday invitations dried up before autumn arrived. And I didn't wait for closure. 3 months later, I opened a small bookstore on Bainbridge Island. Nothing fancy, just a cozy space tucked between a consignment shop and a coffee roaster. We had reading nooks, secondhand shelves, and a corkboard wall where visitors could post anonymous notes about the stories they were too scared to tell out loud. I called the place the Cropped Corner. Every Thursday, we held a writing circle. No prompts, no rules, just a room of women who'd been edited out of family albums, business meetings, group chats, wills. They wrote, they cried, they laughed like women who knew that healing didn't always come with applause. Ronan visited one afternoon. He handed me a drawing. This is everyone from the cruise, he said, pointing to stick figures labeled with crooked names. In the middle, he'd drawn me, wearing a long black dress, holding a book. A golden heart on my chest. I knelt beside him. Why did you put me in the center? He looked at me like the answer was obvious. Because that's where you belonged. I didn't cry, but I held the drawing to my chest a little longer than I needed to before pinning it to the corkboard. That night, I wrote the last entry in the journal I'd started on the ship. I don't need their seat anymore. I made my own table. I closed the notebook, placed it on the shelf behind the register, and unlocked the front door just as the first customer of the day walked in. A few days later, I sat on the porch behind the store, sipping tea and watching the tide roll in. The ferry sounded in the distance. Children played along the rocky shoreline. A couple walked their dog, laughing about something I'd never know. And I realized something. The insult had never been the lobster. It was the plate. But I was done asking for another one. I built the kitchen. Sometimes the most painful betrayals don't come with shouting. They come with silence, empty chairs, and names left off the list. This story isn't just about a mother-in-law or a cruise. It's about the quiet ways families decide who matters and what happens when someone dares to matter anyway. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family, left out on purpose, but expected to stay silent? Share your thoughts in the comments. We read every one. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful family stories that reveal the truth behind the smiles.